we're recording now, right?
We are recording now, yeah.
Because I think this is going to be the cold open start of the episode. Have I ever told you that I have met Jojo Siwa?
What?
This was a very long time ago when I was in high school. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, as a lot of listeners know. Jojo Siwa is from Omaha. Wow. Or she at least lived there for a period of time.
What the fuck, dude? You met Jojo. I'm sorry, my head is still spinning.
And so she was like 11 or 12. Like she was young, maybe even younger. And for whatever reason, she toured my high school as a prospective student, even though she was too young to really be thinking that seriously about high school. And then I don't even know if she ended up going to a formal high school because of her fame. But she was still famous at that time because she was on Dance Moms. I had never watched Dance Moms. I didn't know who she was because I didn't grow up with cable. I didn't watch reality TV like that. But she came to our school and it was this whole big thing of everyone freaking out that Jojo Siwa is here. We all filed into the auditorium and she did a performance. She had the big bows still and the like side ponytail at the very top of her head. And I remember being really mean about it to my friends because I was like, why the fuck are we watching this bratty child do dance?
And to be fair, we're all kind of still asking that question.
Yeah, a little bit. Except now she's subjecting us to really bad music and ripping off the aesthetic of Kiss and not realizing that she's doing that and acting like she's original, even though she's not. So to say I met Jojo Siwa, that might be a bit of a stretch, but I have seen Jojo Siwa in the flesh dancing.
Holy shit.
It was so weird. It doesn't make sense why it happened.
Wow. So is Dance Moms filmed in Omaha?
No.
Is that show? Oh,
no.
Okay.
No.
Then why?
I don't know. Okay. The studio that it's based out of is in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
How many seasons was Jojo Siwa in? I have literally never watched an episode of Dance Moms. I know there's a lot of people who, in hindsight, have reassessed it and are like, it is so terrible that we let this go on for as long as it did.
I mean, it is an absolute pleasure to watch. As a reality TV connoisseur, yeah, those children are treated horribly. Absolutely. Can't deny that. But as far as reality TV goes, what a gift.
So Jojo Siwa was, according to Wikipedia, on Dance Moms for 6 seasons. So when she toured our high school, yeah, she would have been, because I was in high school from 2013 through 2017. And Dance Moms started airing in 2011. So yeah, she would have been like in the middle of doing that. Apparently we'll talk about Jojo Siwa more later.
If you've seen Dance Moms, let us know what your favorite episode is. Send me an email. I'd be really curious because I have one for sure.
Oh, shit.
And it's the one where Abby Lee goes to the police station because one of the moms tells her to be quiet during a performance. At the time, she had a motorized wheelchair. So she didn't even get into a car. She just drove the motorized wheelchair all the way to the police station, and the film crew where they were like chasing her. They didn't know where she went. And that also is a very like iconic scene. It's not a deep cut by any means. Well, should we start the episode?
Yeah.
I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marin, and you're listening to
Tell Me I'm Sorry,
a podcast where we deconstruct and muse on depictions of girlhood in film, literature, and other media.
a feminist celebration of pop culture, the audacity of youth, and the ways we grow away from and into our bodies, beliefs, and dreams for ourselves and each other.
And today we are discussing
Maggie and Marin Movie Awards.
MMMA.
Not to be confused with MMA.
Which does deserve respect. Mixed martial arts. We are not good at that.
Not our skill set.
But what we can do is reflect on the movies this podcast covered in 2024 and talk about some of our favorites and talk about other 2024 pop culture that we loved as a way to reflect on the past year and usher in the new one.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. So
Yes.
that's what we're doing today. We're super excited to be here. This is the first annual Maggie and Marin Movie Awards.
Yeah.
Hopefully this will become a yearly tradition.
Yes, absolutely. I thought maybe we could start out with just reminding everyone of all of the movies that we have covered.
Yes.
In 2024. In order. Ever After. And okay, as I'm reading these, please imagine like a montage of the film like they do in real award ceremonies. Okay. So Ever After, Romeo and Juliet, Nancy Drew, The Lost Daughter, Plan B, The Starling Girl, Support the Girls, Makeup, Shirkers, Miller's Girl, Cruel Intentions, The Virgin Suicides, Scream, The Slumber Party Massacre and Slumber Party Massacre, and The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love.
Honestly, what a stacked list. We did good with our curating.
When I was making that list, I thought, oh, we've really covered some good ones. And then looking at the intertextualities as well, I was like, this is a real intellectual endeavor, an artistic endeavor that I think I take for granted sometimes because I enjoy it. Our first award is favorite movie the podcast covered. Also, Marin came up with all of these award topics except for the last one. So thank you, Marin. Marin gets an award for that.
Thank you. I don't know if I deserve it, but I'll take it. You go first for this one.
So favorite movie the podcast covered for the Maggie Award, it goes to Makeup.
I knew you were going to say this.
Makeup, directed by Claire Oakley. I have to go with Makeup because it just hit all of the spots for me that I look for in a film. It's coming of age, it's queer, it's atmospheric, it's quiet, intense, thoughtful, strange, uses a lot of symbolism. And so in that sense, it feels very literary. And I also felt like it was just a really beautiful portrayal of how different artistic mediums inform film, which you can say for every artistic medium. I think good art is really informed by a variety of artistic mediums and really understands the traditions that they're working inside of. Two of the things that I really loved about this film that we didn't get to talk about in our episode, so I'm kind of using this as an opportunity to talk about them, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. Two of the major influences that Claire Oakley talked about in a couple interviews for the visual aspects of the film and the symbolic ones as well. One being the American photographer Todd Hido. It's Hido. And he has a series called Homes at Night, and then another series just called Interiors. And there's these sort of like very stark portraits of these interior spaces, or literally just of these homes at night. And it's exactly what it sounds like. They're like homes at night. It's just like homes at night being photographed. There are lights on inside the home, but the streets are empty and we don't see any people around. So as I'm staring at these, I'm like, these are so beautiful, but also they feel eerie. And what is it? And finally I realized it's because even though the lights are on at night, there's no sign of like wakeful human life. And so Oakley says in an interview with Little White Lies that his work is very atmospheric. It's all quite misty. And in the twilight, we wanted to try and create that feeling. And I think that really comes through if you look at some of his work and then watch this film. The other influence is an Austrian artist. Her name is Maria Lasnig, and she's primarily known for her self-portraits. Specifically, there's a self-portrait called Self-Portrait Under Plastic from 1972. And it's a self-portrait of the artist with plastic over her face. And Oakley says, that picture of her under plastic really struck me as how suffocating it can be to be a woman or express yourself. The picture seeped into my unconscious and surfaced as those imagined in the film of loads of caravans wrapped in plastic. This film is so layered, but leaves so much open to interpretation. And then to hear her artistic vision and how deeply informed it was by these other artists puts it like further in conversation with some kind of canon. It feels canonical. I don't know that there's a name for it yet, but her awareness of the conversations that she is in with other artists deepens the audience connection with the work. I feel like I just talked for a really long time, but I love that film so much.
I know you do. And it is a movie that definitely, it grew on me between the first time I watched it and the second time I watched it. And then even since we have talked about it for that episode, which was many months ago now, as I've continued to think about it, it has grown on me even more because it is just such an assured, complete vision in a way that is undeniable. Great pick. Anything else you want to say?
I don't think so.
Now is my turn. I'm going to be weird and lay out my process for choosing this because it was hard. Maybe it was really easy for you to pick a movie for this category, but for me it was hard because if I'm thinking about movies that feel so formally assured, makeup would definitely be in the running in that way. So would, I think, The Lost Daughter or Romeo and Juliet. Those are just absolute aesthetic marvels, and they have this command of tone and visual that is just unmatched. But also, a big thing for me when it comes to movies that I love the most is rewatchability. I love rewatching. Throughout the course of my life, I've had people who've been like, wait, you've seen that movie 10 times? How? I'm like, because it's good. And I like it. And it's rewarding to rewatch it. And when I factor in the element of rewatchability, and in that sense, I'm voting more with my heart than my head. Though I think this movie is also visually very beautiful. It's wonderfully acted. It has everything I would want in a movie. And so that is why the Marin Award for Best Movie has to go to Ever After. Is Drew's British accent a little shaky at times in that movie? Yeah, but I don't care. She still gets at this emotional truth of that character and all the not all the characters, because there is the abusive stepmother, but most of the characters in that movie, they're so lovable. They really grow. They really change. You're really rooting for them as they go on their respective journeys. It's really smart about how it's intervening with the idea of fairy tale in terms of, yes, it's this story about this young girl falling in love with this prince and the social mobility that comes with that. But it's also a movie about her cultivating community and seeking love in all these different forms from people around her as she is dealing with the lack of love she gets from her stepmother. And I find it so moving. And also just the way it's shot, the way it uses location and the natural world is so rich and textured and lovely. And I just know that I'm going to love that movie for my whole life. So that's why I had to pick it.
I love that. The first thing I thought, though, when you mentioned her British accent being shaky, I'm like, well, it is set in France. So maybe that was part of it. You know?
Right.
I had not considered the question of rewatchability. I love that. I don't like to rewatch movies generally.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense why I wouldn't include that, but it makes a lot of sense. Like if there's any movie on here that I've seen at like least a handful of times, it is Ever After, because it does have that rewatchability factor.
Because Romeo and Juliet was the most, I think, transcendent first watch for me, because I had never seen that movie before until covering it for the show. And so that was really in the running for me. But I was just like, there's a limit to how much I can watch that movie, or how frequently I can watch that movie, because it's just so sad.
Yeah.
That's why Ever After prevailed.
Right. Oh, that makes sense. And it's Cinderella's story.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why fairy tales have existed for generations and generations and generations, right? We like to hear those stories. This is fun.
This is fun. Okay, are we ready for our next category? Okay, next category is favorite episode of the podcast, which is a whole different beast. Doesn't necessarily have to align with what your favorite movie was that we covered. Maggie, what was your favorite episode of Tell Me I'm Sorry in 2024?
All right. The Maggie Award for favorite episode goes to, hands down, is what I wrote on my paper, The Starling Girl. It's my absolute favorite episode. I just feel like we were really in tune with each other in that conversation. Not that we aren't usually, but we were, just lit up. And I think that it was also a point in the podcast where we really started to kind of understand how to have these conversations. I feel like every episode we're learning something new about talking about film and art in this context, right? But there's just something different about that one. The story felt so relatable. And when I was talking about that film, even though I hadn't had that exact experience, I could see my life filtered through Jem's experience, but also Jem's experience was being filtered through my life. And I just felt such a deep connection to it. And it was just so well done. Anyway, so The Starling Girl, by and far, favorite episode.
That was mine too.
I knew it. I felt like we were going to be.
I have two technically, but The Starling Girl was my really genuine one for all the reasons that you mentioned. That just was such an alive conversation. And that was the episode where, after I listened to it through the first time, because I listened to it to edit them, but then after I post them, I also always listen to them. And I was listening to it while driving here, actually, I think, to record the next episode. And as I was driving and listening, I just was like, this is really fucking good. The fruits of our labor became really real for me in listening to that episode in full. And I really valued that experience and the conversation that we had about it. I also have to throw in there, though, as honorable mention, I guess, the Cruel Intentions episode, purely because it was so fun to record that one. There's just so much laughter in that one because that movie is a fucking mess. And for that reason, in a way, it was also kind of in contention for my favorite movie. But then I was like, no. Did you think I was going to pick Cruel Intentions?
I thought that you might. Because once you said the rewatchability factor, I thought you might.
And you would have lost all respect for me.
No, I wouldn't have. I was also thinking it might have been the incredibly true adventure of two girls in love. Because once you started talking about like the visuals, I knew the film had too much merit for it to be Cruel Intentions. Okay. As you went on describing it, I was like, oh, it's not Cruel Intentions. But I thought it might be The Incredibly True Adventure.
That one, the Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love does feel like, to me, spiritually connected to Ever After in terms of it was up there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as a runner-up, I have to shout out the Cruel Intentions episode because it was just such a relief to film that episode because we went into that movie acknowledging that it was trash. We had a lot of good laughs about it, but then we also had some very serious and important conversations about that movie too. We talked about Wuthering Heights in connection to it. I'm just happy with how that one turns out. That's one where I can really feel our joy in the act of creating it.
Yeah. I'm still pissed that they use that Counting Crows song, though.
I also think that my origin story for Cruel Intentions is, I don't know if I'm ever going to top that as an origin story.
That should have been one of our awards. Yeah. Well, you win. That's an award between you and I. Who had the best origin story? Maggie, present Marin with a Maggie award. With the Maggie Award for Best Origin Story.
Thank you.
Yes.
I will also take this opportunity to go on the record and say that my Spotify Wrapped for 2024, where it breaks down your top artists, songs, whatever, and the big reveal is your top 5 songs of the year, and 4 of my 5 were from the Cruel Intentions soundtrack. So they were the most listened to songs were from Cruel Intentions. And I have no shame about that because that soundtrack is really fucking good.
No, it is. It is.
So
it almost like makes me mad. It does make me mad. I think I've been clear about that, actually. So, yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if the Cruel Intentions soundtrack sneaks in there again in 2025 because I'm still listening to it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next award is, I love this one. It's not an award I would have thought of.
Our next award is Sexiest Intertextuality.
I love that. Do we want to go back? I don't know why I was thinking we would go back and forth.
We could go back and forth.
We don't have to, though.
I have 2. I have one of yours and one of mine.
I did 2 too.
So we could do a back and forth.
Oh, I had a note on here, actually. Marin, can you please remind me and introduce our listeners to your definition of sexy? I feel like it's very important.
Okay. Sexy is my favorite adjective, possibly in the entire English language. This all started when I called a thunderstorm sexy one time. Not because a thunderstorm has anything to do with sex. When that clap of thunder just booms and you hear it and feel it for the first time, you're like, that was sexy. Because it's audacious, it's satisfying, it's surprising, it's, dare I say, titillating. Is this making sense? Am I giving you what you want?
Yes.
Because I haven't actually thought about this definition that I crafted for myself in so long that it's kind of hard to put it into words. So this idea that intertextuality is sexy, which was an idea I introduced when I first pitched the idea of this podcast, is that it's invigorating and exciting and unexpected to put 2 pieces of art or media or whatever in conversation with each other. So that's where I'm getting this idea of sexiest intertextuality. Does that satisfy?
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. I was like, I can't just talk about this without our listeners understanding what we really mean by sexy, you know? Also, I love hearing you talk about it.
I have very niche things that I think are sexy.
Yeah.
Like a sturdy paragraph that's super well constructed. Oh, so sexy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense to apply that adjective. Okay, so sexiest intertextuality that I chose. I'm giving my own award to my own intertextuality.
As you should.
Uh-huh. And it's actually another film I put in conversation with another film. Actually, both of them ended up being films, which I was kind of surprised by. But part of what I've learned in this podcast is that, and this sounds so obvious, but that like films are in conversations with each other, or you can put them in conversation with each other in the exact same way you can put different like writers and books in conversation with each other. And I like honestly had never thought about that prior to doing this podcast, because I don't think of myself as, I don't know, I'm not a film bro. Okay. I'm not like, oh, film is high art. It is. I'm not saying it's not, but my sexiest intertextuality that I chose was National Anthem, the film, that I had put in conversation with The Incredibly True Adventures of Two Girls in Love. The film is and I actually wrote here, this film is sexy in the way Marin uses the word. And then I said, which can you please take a moment to describe? Because I knew if I had to describe the definition that it would explain everything I wanted to say about this film. It was surprising and profound and beautiful and definitely titillating, right? It is the exact definition of sexy to me. Marin's definition.
Thank you. No, that's a great film. That's a film that is about literally sex and eroticism in terms of that being part of how these characters are connecting to each other. But it's also about the landscape that they're in. And those giant cliff formations are sexy. I don't know.
Yeah. There's a thunderstorm.
Yeah, which ends up being really sad because a horse dies. But that's a great pick. And I think the way you used it in that episode was a really great way to bridge time, because The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love is a film from 1995 and National Anthem is a film from 2024. So the way it's bridging time and these different depictions of queerness was also sexy. Claps for Maggie.
Thank you. Claps for National Anthem.
Claps for National Anthem. Go see National Anthem if you haven't watched it yet. So the intertextuality that I chose, that I have deemed sexiest, is the essay by Roger Ebert called Fandom Menace, Get a Life, which we talked about in our Scream episode, where he says a lot of really insightful and prescient things about the nature of fandom, masculinity, and these were all things that have only become more evident to us as fandom has progressed in online spaces. And I have deemed it sexiest because it totally allowed me to see the masculinity being portrayed in Scream in a new way that I had never thought of before. And Scream is a movie, again, that I had seen many, many times before we covered it for this podcast. And so to have this written work allow me to see it in this new way was really exciting. And I also think that intertextuality is sexy to me because I stumbled onto it by accident. If something's sexy, there's an air of mystery to it. And it wasn't an intertextuality I deliberately sought out because I was like, oh, I think this will go really well with Scream. Because sometimes that's how I approach the intertextuality. It was something that I had stumbled onto totally separately. And then when I watched Scream and I was like, wait, these two go together. And so it's just kismet. And I find that sexy. So thank you, Roger Ebert. Rest in peace, King.
I'm so glad that you said all the things you just said, because the sexiest intertextuality I chose for you, I feel like I should explain. So we both chose two sexiest intertextualities. One was the one that was one of ours. And the other one, we chose the other person. So I chose one of Marin's intertexts as the sexiest. And the surprising connection that we find sometimes like by accident, or it's just very unexpected, between intertext and the film, I think is particularly apparent in this choice.
I'm scared because I have no idea what you're going to say.
And that would be the 2003 cult classic, The Room, that Marin put in conversation with Miller's Girl.
I forgot that I did that.
I remember when you said like The Room, and I was like, what the fuck? Where are we going with this? And I mean, it made sense. It totally made sense. My what the fuck was like surprised and excitement at whatever you were going to say next. I feel like you could potentially use the word titillating to describe the room, but it's certainly surprising and titillating in a sense where you're like, what the?
It's a how did this get made type of movie. And the gonzo nature of that is, I would say, titillating. I'm going to look up what the formal definition of titillating is, because I know I've been using it a bunch. I've introduced it into this conversation.
Well, I think it has several.
Right. So it's like arousing mild sexual excitement or interest. And then to titillate as a verb, stimulate or excite someone, especially in a sexual way. But then the sentence example they give is, these journalists are paid to titillate the public, which I would say is less sexual. It's just about piquing your curiosity and interest.
Right.
Which The Room certainly does.
When I think of The Room, there are multiple things I think about, but specifically I think about that scene where he's like having sex with her belly button, which if that is, something that you enjoy, that's fine. But that's not what's supposed to be happening here. I think he just doesn't know where her vagina is. I'm not sure. It's a really confusing scene. And I find it titillating. Not in that I'm sexually aroused, but that it is of a sexual nature and I'm interested in what's happening. I don't even feel cringy about it, that scene. I'm just like confused.
Well, yeah, because the thing with The Room, which was my main argument when I brought up that movie in conversation with Miller's Girl, is that Tommy Wiseau, in writing and directing and starring in that movie, thought he was making a genuine human drama with real poignant stakes. And he failed on every count. And so that's what makes it such a fascinating cultural object, is the total, utter failure of it. But in that failure, it transmutes into something else that has endured and I think will endure. And it's so fascinating, the fact that he thought he was portraying this genuinely hot and romantic sex scene between these two lovers who would eventually become tragic. But then we're all just distracted by the fact that his dick is aimed at her belly button. It's great.
It really is. In terms of rewatchability, The Room has serious rewatchability for me, because I am honestly pretty much just as surprised every time that I watch it. I'm like, how? Why is this happening?
There's so much insane shit in that movie that there's no way to remember all of it. So there's bound to be something you have forgotten about. We're remembering the sex scenes, and the sex scenes are so ridiculous that I forget about the random line where the mom is like, by the way, the doctor confirmed it. I have breast cancer. And then it's never addressed again. And it's a total surprise because your brain is not capable of holding it all in memory. Maggie has tears in her eyes from laughing so hard.
Because just like a montage of like the most ridiculous scenes are just playing in my mind now. When he's like goes to the flower shop and he says, "Hi, doggy."
You're my favorite customer.
Wait, does he say hi, doggy, or bye, doggy? Maybe he says bye on the way.
I think he says bye.
Yeah, he says bye.
And he like pats its head very awkwardly.
Bye, doggy. Or when they're playing football in their tuxedos.
Now, I get to give my Marin Award for Maggie's sexiest intertextuality. And the award goes to the essay, After the World Breaking World Building, by Vanessa Angelica Villarreal, from the book Magical/Realism, Essays on Music, Memory, Fantasy, and Borders, which you brought up in our Shirkers episode. The reason that I have deemed this intertextuality of yours the sexiest is because it introduced this idea of magical realism into the conversation when we were talking about Shirkers. Similar to what I was saying about Scream and that Roger Ebert essay, is the idea of Shirkers being a work of magical realism had never crossed my mind, ever. And so you, through that intertextuality, just entirely unlocked the film in a new way for me that now I'll always have. There's no way to not see it in conversation with magical realism. And that was really fucking cool. So I wanted to honor that essay and your decision to talk about it.
Thank you.
Any last comments on sexiness or intertextuality or the two as a combination?
I don't think so. I think we covered it
already. Our next award is favorite performance, meaning favorite performance in a movie that we covered on the podcast in 2024.
Do you want to go first? You should go first.
I'll go first. This was maybe the easiest one for me to answer, actually, because the answer just came to me instantly and I was like, that's it. And the Marin Award for Best Performance goes to Regina Hall in Sport the Girls. Just an absolute, I want to call it towering or Titanic performance, but that doesn't feel right because she's just embodying this very regular woman. She's crafting a character who is a stranger to every single one of us when we start the movie. And then immediately we are able to recognize that we have probably met this woman in some way in our own lives, especially if you have worked in food service or customer service or an industry like that. And she's just called upon to do so much in a way that I don't think, it's not the type of movie or role where she gets the credit for how much she's being called upon to do, because she needs to be like warm and kind of motherly to these other waitresses that she's managing, but also she needs to express sometimes very subtly her frustration with the world and her life while also being funny, but then also breaking your heart. And it's truly just a thing to behold. I love her in that film so much. I think all the time about the scene where Danielle, one of the servers, her son is homesick from school and she's struggling to find a sitter for him. So at one point he is in the restaurant and he's sitting next to Regina Hall's character, who's named Lisa. And she is creating the schedule for the next few weeks, the work schedule. And she's explaining to him how she does it. And he's sitting next to her and drawing. And just the way she sits with him and engages with him in this way that she's not expected to do. She already has so much going on. She's trying to run a restaurant that's owned by an incompetent asshole and has lots of patrons who are sleazy. And just the warmth that she radiates in that scene to this little boy. It's so kind, but in a way that is not commodified, I think is a testament to what acting is able to do in capturing this person so acutely that we immediately love her and want the best for her. Because it's not easy to do.
That was such a great pick. I think about that movie a lot too, especially the scene where she just sits out back and she's staring at the sky.
And she caws at the bird and she closes her eyes. That scene is so good.
Mm-hmm. I feel so much in that moment that I'm just there with her. I mean, it is so real to me. Good pick. So for the Maggie Award for favorite performance in a movie we covered, that award goes to Olivia Colman as Lita in The Lost Daughter. It's so good. It's iconic. Yeah. The complexity of that character. I think a lot about how there were multiple scenes where the entire frame was just her face. And she had to convey so much in a look, right? The depth and like the longing and the grief that character embodied, right? From the affair, from her leaving her children, from her coming back to her children, the weight of misogyny and patriarchy and her work as an academic. And you could see all of that every time the camera panned to her face. It's just so masterful. As an audience, we're able to see her entire past in just the flicker of a single look. I think it's masterful. Olivia Colman is wonderful. Yeah.
This is a great pick. Definitely was in the running for me for all the reasons that you said. I think I've especially in hindsight gained an even greater appreciation for that performance because recently I watched Fleabag for the first time. Have you watched Fleabag?
It's been a while, but I've seen most of it.
Because she's in it and she's hilarious in Fleabag. So fucking funny. So evil, but so funny. And I've seen her in the show Heartstopper, where she played one of the main characters' mom, and she's a really warm, tender, quiet presence in that show. And then obviously The Favorite, which she won her Oscar for and gave like the greatest Oscar speech of all time. I watch it all the time. It's just so delightful because it was a whole upset win. She was not expected to win, and then she won, and she was just super off the cuff and candid and so funny, so fucking funny and charming. And in that movie, she's very funny, but she's also this very tragic figure. And she just has such a range, is what I'm getting at. Hot Fuzz, she's fucking great in that. So funny. So I'm just ranting about Olivia Colman now, but the point is that I think her performance in The Lost Daughter was truly mode that a lot of people hadn't seen her in before, or at least I hadn't. And so that makes it even more impressive to me as well when you look at the breadth of her career. And that movie's fucking awesome. Everything about that movie's awesome. I think this is a great pick.
Claps for
Olivia Colman.
Olivia, if you're listening, this is a very prestigious award. So I hope you feel honored.
The next Maggie and Marin Award that we are going to discuss is Pop Culture Encounter in 2024 outside of the podcast that you're grateful for.
I had a hard time like picking one. I felt very pressured to choose this one thing. And once I picked it, I realized it was very specifically the way that I encountered this film that made it stick out in my mind in this very beautiful way that I feel like really embodies the spirit of this podcast. But the pop culture encounter is the absolutely fucking iconic Love Lies Bleeding.
Amen. We saw that movie together.
We did. Okay, so I was going to go see it by myself. And then randomly I texted Marin and Lindsay.
Mm-hmm. Our friend Lindsay. Shout out Lindsay.
What's up?
We love you and miss you.
Yes. And I was like, hey, I'm going to go see Love Lies Bleeding. Like, you guys want to go? And then you were like, yeah, you're both free. It was a really last minute thing. And so we get to the theater and the theater was broken. That's what they said to us. The theater.
That is the way the cashier described it. He said, oh, we can't show that movie because the theater is broken. I'm assuming he meant the projector.
Right. That was the assumption that we made.
Or maybe the entire theater, like seats, everything just caved into the earth. I don't.
Which honestly, at that theater, I would believe it.
That theater is so gross.
It's disgusting. But it's the closest to our house, so it's where we usually go. So we couldn't see it. I was really disappointed. But then TJ, my lover, ended up having a gig that night. So we went and watched him play. And we went to the brewery and hung out and talked. And it was just a really beautiful impromptu evening of some girls out on the town.
Ace was also there.
Ace did. Oh yeah, Ace was there. Well, he met up with us.
Initially, he and I were going to go to TJ's gig. That was our plan for the night. And then you texted me about the Love Lies Bleeding. And I said to him, sorry, but I kind of would rather do this. And he was like, okay. And then the theater was broken. And so I called him and was like, we're not going to the movie. Did you still want to go to the gig? Or I think he was still planning on going to the gig just by himself. And so I was like, we're meeting up with you. And then we all met up. But it was mostly the three of us gals ranting about politics and other things. And he was just a very good listener, like he always is.
Yeah. And what sticks out in my mind from that night, too, is us just being in the car.
Yes,
and driving there.
Yeah, because we drove separately to the theater, and then we were like, it would be dumb for all three of us to drive separately to the brewery. So we all got in my car and were gossiping in the car as we drove.
Yeah.
It was a great night.
It was. And then we ended up seeing the movie the next day.
A different theater that is much nicer.
And it was amazing. And I'm so glad that we got to have that experience together. So that was my favorite pop culture encounter because I encountered it with these other women who I really love and respect. And we were able to talk about the implications of that film. And the film was so fucking phenomenal. Obviously.
Gnarly in the best way.
Oh, shit. So good. Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien are just dynamic. My pop culture encounter 2024 award goes to Love Lies Bleeding.
That is a great pick. And that actually does somewhat dovetail into mine. The pop culture encounter that I am very grateful for this year is a series of encounters, which was just going to the movie theater a lot this year. I have talked before about my love of going to the theater. Growing up, it was something that I was lucky enough to do a lot. And then with the COVID pandemic and then being in grad school, there was a few years where I just wasn't able to prioritize it the way that I used to. When I was in college, I really got in the habit of going to the movies by myself, which there's still a weird stigma against, but I love doing it. I think everyone should do it if you want to see a movie. And so 2024, I wasn't in school anymore. I was working. I had weekends that were usually my own time. And I really prioritized going to the movie theater. And I did that a lot. And it brought me a lot of joy. And as a result, I would like to shout out some of my favorite movie theater experiences, if I may. First is Love Lies Bleeding, for all the reasons that Maggie mentioned. That movie's fucking awesome. Seeing it with friends was great. We've all had really visceral reactions to what was happening. And I have created another award that I want to shout out now. Okay. Which is crossover event most delightful to me. Crossover between something we talked about on the podcast and something else in pop culture that existed outside of the podcast, which would be the one and only Ed Harris, because he was in The Lost Daughter as Lyle in his little hat. And then he was also in Love Lies Bleeding as Kristen Stewart's murderous evil father. And the scene in Love Lies Bleeding when he gets really mad and starts eating the bugs, that is the height of cinematic sublime to me personally. I also just really love Ed Harris as a performer. I've been obsessed with Ed Harris since I was a child, and I saw National Treasure 2 Book of Secrets in theaters for the first time. He plays the villain in that movie, and he's so good. And I was like, who the fuck is this guy? He's awesome. So that's why Ed Harris gets the crossover event award.
I love it.
Another theater going experience that I want to shout out, which I'm going to say this and Maggie's going to be like, wait, you fucking saw that? Is Wicked.
Oh, no. You had to see it, though.
I had to see it because all the behind the scenes drama was just too much. I needed to know what was going on. And I saw it with my mom when I was home for Thanksgiving. We saw it on Thanksgiving, which growing up, we would often go to movies on Thanksgiving. And so she and I went together. The movie was fine. The main cast are phenomenal singers, performers. Ariana Grande was actually really funny and was able to be a comedic presence in ways that I didn't expect her to be able to be. So good job for her. If she wins the Oscar, I honestly won't be mad about it, I guess. And it was too fucking long. The movie did not need to be 2 hours and 40 minutes long. But we bought our tickets ahead of time, like a day or two in advance, because everyone was going to see Wicked. It was such a huge deal. And we're sitting in the theater waiting for it to start. And I turn around and I see that the entire theater behind me is full. And I just start to cry. Before the movie even fucking started. Because when I was a kid and we go to the movies, we'd always try to go when it would be the least busy. It was aspirational to be like, oh, maybe we'll be the only people in the theater. And now the landscape has changed so much that when I do go to the movies, usually there's not that many people there. And I get really sad about it. I'm like, I wish I was at a movie where it was just packed. And so to be in a movie theater where it was super packed and everyone was really excited to be there, it made me cry. And so that's why I have to shout out Wicked, even though I thought it was a very average movie. I was like, I'm glad that I was a part of this.
I just think that's really beautiful. And it's a great reframing of the way I approach going to theaters, which is still, I hope nobody else is in there. But yeah, I mean, you go to the movie for this shared experience, really. Mm-hmm. And typically there are not that many people in a theater, even on like a Friday or Saturday night.
Which I think part of that is maybe just where we live. We live in a smaller city. You know, if I lived in LA or New York, generally, even the more niche art house movies would probably have a pretty decent showing. The movie theater industry and the film industry can't be sustained by two cities in the country, you know? So that is why, if possible, I try to go to a movie in a theater. And I really value that experience.
I am thinking about going to the movies growing up. I've talked about that on this podcast. We went to movies all the time. It was very common for us to have seen every single movie in the theater. There was nothing else for us to see, and we had to wait until a new movie came out. And the theater was almost always packed. Like my memories of going to movies with my dad, even if it was later at night or at a weird time, you had to find a seat. And now the expectation is that no one will really be there.
Yeah. And, you know, part of that is how expensive it is to go to the movies. I'm grateful that I live in a city where I can afford to go just by myself, especially if I go to a matinee. But at movie theaters in Los Angeles, it's $20 a person for a ticket. I also feel really grateful that we have a great local theater here that I always try to go to. Shout out to the Grandin Theater. They also have the best popcorn. And wherever you live, I encourage you to look up your local movie house because chances are the tickets will be cheaper, the facilities will be cleaner than a chain, the projection and sound will be better, and it'll just be an overall quainter experience. And those kinds of places could really use your support. And I firmly believe in them as community touchstones.
On that note, shout out to the Lyric.
Yes, the Lyric in Blacksburg, also a great theater.
Those places are just being run by people who care about making sure the community has a space, that the tradition of moviegoing is carried on. And AMC, they don't give a shit. They just want your money. They just want you to pay $20 for a shitty bag of popcorn and a drink, which is literally what it cost TJ because they didn't have the prices up. So he's like, I'll just take a popcorn and a drink. It was $20 fucking.
That should be illegal. And your local movie house probably also doesn't play 30 minutes of fucking ads before the movie.
Yeah. You don't have to watch Nicole Kidman talk about, what does she even talk about? Put your cell phones away? I think she talks
about how heartbreak feels good in a place like this.
Okay.
I will not have this disrespect to Nicole Kidman.
I just don't think it's necessary.
It's not, but it's just such a meme now that they can't get rid of it.
Yeah. So our last award is, what is one thing that the making of this podcast has taught us about ourselves and the world? Would you like to go first?
Sure. The statement I have come to in response to this question is that there are certain things in this world which you do not always want to do. You know they are expected of you or you need to do them, but you don't want to do them. But in actually doing them, you realize that they are always a worthy use of your time. And I think that is a truth that I've understood before doing this podcast. But in doing the preparation for the episodes, actually recording the episodes, and then doing the editing of the episodes, even if going into it, I am tired or stressed, having done it, I'm always in the space of, that was a good use of my time. My time has been spent worthily. It has been spent on something that deserves it. And I think that is a good thing to be reminded of. I think it is good in these uncertain, scary times that we live in to be able to provide ourselves with a structure that we know is always worth it. And I think that is something this podcast has provided me.
Well said. Because even though it is something I enjoy doing, it is still, because it is an intellectual and artistic pursuit, it is real labor. Sometimes I don't want to do the labor aspect of it, which maybe is slightly tangential to what you're saying, but
no, I think that's exactly it. Sometimes I don't want to edit. I work an office job 8 hours a day. I don't want to go home and edit. But then I make myself do it for 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And I'm like, yeah, that was definitely a better use of my time than scrolling on Facebook or watching YouTube.
Yeah. And I, after teaching all day, am like, I don't want to analyze any media. I don't want to talk about it. I just want to watch it and pretend I have no thoughts, which I do watch things without thinking. And that is also a good use of my time, because it's okay to simply enjoy art, but there is definitely joy in the analysis of it. And it's ultimately why I interact with it in the first place. But oh my God, I'm kind of stressed. I realize I'm presenting like our final award, but it brings us full circle because it will bring us back to JoJo Siwa.
Oh, right. I fucking forgot that was how this all started.
Okay, I'll just say the award and then kind of explain. The award does not go to JoJo Siwa. That's not what I'm saying here. Okay, so one thing that making this podcast has taught me and about the world is I've really learned to appreciate the richness of pop culture. I always have enjoyed watching reality TV, which is certainly pop culture, and analyzing it in that way. But I think my analysis of it has always been that this is fluff and here's why. But this podcast has, I think, humbled me in the sense that you can say all day long, oh, I'm too cool for whatever pop culture phenomenon is going around. But at the end of the day, it is shaping our world. And not only is it shaping the world, but it's coming from the world. The pop culture is being created because it's being created in response to what people are asking for. So it's a constant conversation between the audience and its creators. It's really never one-sided. And when it is one-sided, it's not going to become pop culture, right? If there's no audience for it. Thinking about that, it made me think of JoJo Siwa, obviously, because I am fascinated by her. Her music is bad. Her dancing. Now, I'm not someone that's not like a medium I'm super familiar with, but it's not particularly innovative. And it doesn't appear to me, she doesn't appear to have any really amazing technical skills around dancing. I mean, sure, she's a better dancer than I am, but ultimately, I don't think there's anything innovative happening.
She has not ever spoken about dance in a way that leads me to believe she has a deep cultural knowledge or understanding of dance as a cultural artifact and something that is related to history and politics and stuff like that.
Yeah. Which I think is a sign of real art, right? When you have this awareness of the traditions in which you're working. I think that that's why something like Instagram poetry, I do hate it. And I'm okay with maybe that being pretentious, but it's because that poetry is being made oftentimes by people who have not spent time understanding who they're in conversation with what they're in conversation with. Every time you sit down to write a poem or anything, you are working within some kind of tradition. There is something canonical about what you're doing. And for me, I think that's the beautiful part of making art. And so as soon as you're lacking in that awareness, you're removing yourself from that conversation. And I'm no longer really interested in what you have to say because I'm like, you don't actually want to be discussing this with me. You just want me to look at you.
As evidenced by JoJo Siwa speaking into a microphone and saying that she invented K-pop.
Yes.
Because there's part of me that's like, am I being too hard on her because she's so young? She grew up on reality television, which has probably permanently damaged her brain. She has not had any privacy to figure out who she is as a person without fame being attached to it. And I can't even fathom what that would be like. But then she went on some radio show and ran her mouth saying that she wanted to invent gay pop. And I just, at that point, I can't take you seriously anymore, no matter what empathy I might have for your upbringing and how it's affected your sense of self. Because if you're making pop music, it's presumably because you like pop music. And if you like pop music, that means you have specific artists whose work you admire and are inspired by. And I just don't see how you can have even a rudimentary understanding of pop music and not know how that intersects with the LGBTQ community. So that's why I'm just like, okay, I'm done with you. I can't. There's no excuse.
No, it's wild. Again, to go back to Instagram poetry, I'm become more comfortable with my pretentious take on it, which I don't know that it's necessarily pretentious, because why are you going to want to practice something if you don't want to be in conversation with those who do it better? I am always striving to be in conversation with artists who I think are better than me. Love her or hate her, which I think we all sort of collectively just love to hate her. I don't love to hate people, but I do watch her because I'm fascinated by the level of cringe I feel.
Are we still talking about JoJo Siwa?
JoJo Siwa, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I went back to JoJo. Yeah. We're going back to JoJo. So love her or hate her, we have to contend with the fact that she is famous. And what does that mean for us? You can have all the money in the world, but if you're not putting out something that people are going to respond to, it's not going to matter. And I think what she's doing is just an example of our worst instincts as participants in American capitalism.
Right, because that's what it all comes back to, is the commodification of art to such a degree that it ceases to be art, perhaps.
And that matters, though. Like pop culture, though, JoJo Siwa is allowing me to have this conversation. I'm just going to wrap it up and say this podcast has taught me to look at pop culture as a reflection of our collective conscious, rather than something that's just happening that I don't have to engage with if I don't want to.
I think that's a great summation and it's super true.
All right.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Let us know what you would have given awards to. We want to hear it, genuinely, whether it's stuff that we talked about on this podcast or not. We would love it if you subscribe to the show on your podcast listening platform of choice. Give us a rating or a review that's nice, that's really helpful for us. Be sure to turn on post notifications so that way you don't ever miss a new episode.
You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Tell Me I'm Sorry and email us your musings and questions at tellmeimsorry@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at _saint_Margaret_.
You can also join our book club via the link in the link tree in our Instagram bio, or I'll put the web address in the show notes and you can copy and paste that into your browser.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about books with us.
This month, we're reading The Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World by Robin Wall Kimmerer,
who is a fantastic writer and scientist.
And it's a pretty quick read. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. We hope that your 2024 had moments which were enriching and joyful for you, and that you are able to continue to find those moments in 2025. Alrighty. Bye.
Bye.